Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin and this is Katnip Dreams of Food. If you're new to my channel, I am doing some food history kind of lessons. In order to determine which country I'm going to choose, I spin this globe at the end of each episode and I pick a country. So the country that I chose at the end of my previous episode was the Philippines. So I'm very excited to tape that one today and share with you guys some of the knowledge that I gained learning about the country. The Philippines, also known as the Republic of the Philippines, is a country that's comprised of multiple islands. It's actually over 7,000 islands that make up the Philippines. So I thought that was very interesting. The Philippines are located in Southeast Asia based on its location between the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. And due to this location, the Philippines have a very vast and interesting food culture and food history that spans over a very long time. So I'll begin just talking very briefly about kind of like a timeline or the history of when different influence came to the Philippines. So the first cultures that are thought to have emerged into the Philippines were from Malaysia, Indonesia, and China. And the first culture to arrive in the Philippines varies based on the source that you use, but some of the ingredients that these cultures did bring to the Philippines include hot chilies as well as coconut. These two ingredients are still widely used in Filipino culture today, so I think that's very interesting, kind of similar to our previous video where the ingredients that were first used very early on are staples of the country today. So much later on, there was a lot of Chinese influence in the Philippines. So it's believed between 1200 and 1300 CE, so the Common Era, that people from China established colonies within the Philippines. So some of the ingredients and dishes that were brought from China include soy sauce, fried egg rolls, one of the most popular dishes, which definitely has Chinese influence and is inspired by the egg rolls that I just mentioned, would be lumpia. And lumpia is essentially a fried spring roll filled with vegetables or different proteins. So it's very interesting how very early on some Chinese cuisine has become a staple within Filipino cuisine. Bean curd as well as any noodle dishes, and they're referred to as Pansit or Pansit, which is a more broad term for noodles, but can be referred to as any noodle dish. Around this time, there was also trade with India, as well as Cambodia and Indonesia. There's a lot of trade present within the Philippines very early on, so that definitely helped bring different ingredients to the country and different cultures, as trade does in the history of any country. So in 1521, and I know that we're just jumping around, but I just want to pick the highlights of the areas that really brought some very distinct ingredients to the Filipino cuisine. So in 1521, the Spanish colonized the Philippines. The Philippines were actually named after King Philip II by the Spanish colonists. So I thought that was very interesting. And I've learned a lot, briefly just throughout my time cooking and just in general and learning about food, in my free time, that the Philippines have a very unique food culture and food history because of this very heavy Spanish influence. So you'll see a lot of ingredients that maybe aren't seen throughout Southeast Asia as much because of this Spanish influence. So some of those ingredients include vinegar, which vinegars are used throughout different Southeast Asian cuisines, but the prominence of vinegar in the Philippines it's a lot. And so in Spain, which I hope I get soon because I would love to do a video on Spain, sherry vinegar is used a lot, but based on the ingredients in the Philippines, coconut vinegar, palm vinegar, or cane vinegar were used significantly, which tend to be slightly less acidic than in maybe Western cuisine. Some other ingredients include tomatoes, garlic, onions, sweet peppers, dairy, and some cooking techniques that were brought from the Spanish colonists would include braising and sauteing, and marinating in vinegar a lot as well. In 1898, the United States actually occupied the Philippines after the Spanish-American War and basically colonized the Philippines. So with that being said, some ingredients were brought to the Philippines, including mayonnaise. So America, I mean, really. Sweetened condensed milk, evaporated milk. One thing that was very unique is the amount of dairy and dairy products, cheese that are used in Filipino cuisine it's very unique compared to other countries in Southeast Asia. So that definitely is due to the Spanish colonization for over 400 years and then that American influence in colonization late 1800s through World War II. So I also want to just bring up some other staple ingredients that I found throughout my research and things that are eaten throughout the Philippines on a daily basis. basis. Rice is a staple in Filipino cuisine, and there are about 20 varieties that are utilized throughout the country. Pansit, which is the broad term for noodles, is very common throughout the Philippines, which I mentioned earlier, as well as rice noodles more specifically. Because of the Philippines' location between the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean, it's no surprise that seafood is a huge part of the cuisine and the food culture. There are over 2,000 species of fish present in the Philippines in the general area, because in the Philippines are also part of the Coral Triangle, which I thought was very interesting. And aquaculture, or the farming of fish, is used and has been used throughout Filipino cuisine and history for a very long time. Some of the varieties of seafood that are eaten would include spider conch, octopus, blue crab, porcupine fish, and sea grapes. So we definitely, seafood is a big part of the cuisine, but one of the ingredients and the proteins that is used throughout Filipino cuisine would be pork. So lechon refers to a whole roasted pig, and this is a dish that you will see throughout the Philippines. If I could cook a whole pig in my apartment, I absolutely would do that for this episode, because it's a staple in the Filipino cuisine. So it's this whole suckling pig, which you'll see, I have a picture of it, and it's marinated in soy, star anise, garlic, and it's roasted whole, often rotating, and some places use like coconut lumber as the lumber of choice, but charcoal and other things can be used too. And this is a staple to any feast or celebration in Filipino cuisine. Some of the produce items that are very central to the Filipino cuisine include coconut, pineapple, strawberries, melon, kiwi, banana, persimmons, tamarind, papaya, ubi, which is like a sweet potato, purple sweet potato, and taro, which is, it looks very similar to ubi, but it's a root vegetable that is also purple, or it can be white as well. And some other miscellaneous ingredients that I found to be very important to the Filipino cuisine include patis, which is basically this amber colored fish sauce that's used throughout the culture, palm vinegar, cane vinegar, coconut vinegar, and dried fish. So these are ingredients that are used throughout the culture. So talking about the ingredients, I also want to talk about the mealtime customs. And this is very broad, but within the Philippines and how meals are shared and the timing of the meals. So one of the first things that I learned was that when meals are served, it's almost served kind of family style. And like I said, this is general. It would change if you probably went out to a restaurant or something like that, or street food. But the idea is that all of the ingredients are together on one table, so you can taste so many different textures and flavors all in one. And even often dessert is served with the savory courses, which is, I thought, was interesting. That's very different than, what I'm used to. Dessert's kind of that sweet treat at the end of the night. But it makes sense if you're having a lot of savory food to have that sweet cut in there, and it's only going to help balance the dish. Hospitality is very important in the Philippines, and one of the most popular greetings that's used is, "Have you eaten yet?" So that's a very common question that people ask when somebody comes to their home and a meal is expected to be served when somebody comes over, and food is so central to the culture and taking care of those around you, which I thought was very cool. So for breakfast, it's often leftovers from the previous night's meal. That could include rice, vegetables, pork. They're utilizing the food from the night before, which is very smart. It makes a lot of sense, and I'd probably save a lot of money on my grocery bill. And if there aren't leftovers from the night before, eggs are very prominent, as well as some maybe sweet pastries in the morning. For lunch, I found a few different stews that were consumed pretty often for lunchtime. So there was a stew that was comprised of mung beans, shrimp, and olive oil, which is definitely a very eclectic variety of flavors from different cuisines, which I thought was pretty interesting. There's also a stew using goat, and then rice is often served, maybe some vegetables, so it can vary, and I mean, that makes a lot of sense. There's so many different options for lunch. And for dinner, there's a lot of different options, but noodle dishes are very common, pork, lots of different produce items. And then for dessert, I definitely noticed some very interesting sweets, which I'll get into very shortly, but there's a lot of different desserts that are eaten throughout the country, and a lot of them utilize coconut or sweetened condensed milk, powdered milk, different gelatins or candied fruits, sometimes using like the ubi or the taro to be the base of a sweet dish, mung beans. So definitely very interesting, a lot of different textures. So I thought that was pretty important to bring up. So some very important dishes to the culture. I already talked about lechon, which is that whole roasted pig. Chicharron, which is basically fried pig skin, is also very popular. The lumpia, which is the fried spring rolls. And so I did an Instagram poll of which dish I should cook for this episode, and lumpia was the one that was suggested twice. if I had a deep fryer, I absolutely would make this dish, or even a deep wok that I could fry something in very quickly. However, I don't have that equipment. I have an electric stove, and I just don't think it'll be the right texture. So maybe when I get a house one day, I'll have that equipment. All right, so some of these I'm gonna read off of the paper. Tuslabua, probably not pronouncing that right, but it's this hanging rice that's hung in, I think it's banana leaves, and then it's served with a gravy that's made with garlic, onion, and pig's brain. So the thought with this dish is to utilize all the parts of an animal, especially pork being very prominent in the culture. And it's actually become a very, even though it's a very traditional food, it's become a very modern food because a lot of restaurants are making spins on it and trying to get, you know, people of younger generations to try it and have it be implemented into the food culture. So I kind of mentioned dessert before, but halo halo, which means mix mix, is probably one of the most popular desserts in the Philippines. And as you see in this picture right here, it's a variety of a lot of different things. So it can often be mung beans or ubi or taro with maybe some candied coconut, some, I don't know, different candied fruits, gelatin, and sometimes topped with sweetened condensed milk. It's usually over shaved ice, and there can be coconut in it. And it's thought to have been influenced from Japanese culture of the shaved ice, which is sometimes topped with sweetened condensed milk. And it's definitely a dish that I'd be very interested to try. I didn't want to attempt making it. I did buy this mix, so maybe I could make that eventually, but I wanted to make sure I made it exactly how it's meant to be eaten. But I think the idea here, kind of similar to the mealtime customs, is to have lots of different textures and flavors all in one dish. So kari kari, which is basically braised tripe and oxtail, that also has some interesting ingredients like peanut butter, which I thought was strange, banana blossoms, and eggplant. And I saw this and I'm really interested to try it. The peanut butter I feel like would work. I don't know, I'd eat it. Salabat, which is a ginger tea. Suman, which is steamed rice wrapped in banana leaves. Menudo, which is a pork and chickpea stew. Polvoron, which is a powdered milk candy that I was almost gonna make, but I didn't really. I don't know, it sounded too sweet. Panyo panyo, which is a pastry filled with either mango or a banana jam. Kinila, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but it's essentially a ceviche, often using things like the sea grapes that I mentioned before. Balut, which I think is one of the most well-known dishes from the Philippines, but it's basically a cooked egg, and it's duck egg with an almost developed duck embryo, so I've had it. It's definitely interesting. I had it at work one time, somebody brought it in, and it's not what you expect. It's an egg with this basically half-developed duck in it. It's crunchy and strange and has a very intense flavor, but it's something that I think is very synonymous with the Philippines. And then the dish that I'm going to be cooking today is adobo. So adobo can refer to not only the actual dish itself, but the cooking technique. So adobo, as you'll see very shortly, it can be based around any protein. Generally it's pork, and I am going to be using pork today. And it's vinegar, soy sauce, garlic, bay leaves, and peppercorn, and it's cooked slow and low, and it's supposed to be very acidic and salty, and it's one of the most popular dishes within the Philippines. So I'm very excited to make it, and I'm gonna serve it with rice. And then I have to talk about Jollibee, which is that fast food chain that I mentioned earlier. So it's very popular in the Philippines, and it's seen throughout the world. So one of the dishes that really stood out to me was the spaghetti and meatballs kind of dish that was served with a banana ketchup. I have never heard of banana ketchup, and it sounded very interesting. And I think that's a perfect example of a dish that was probably influenced from maybe Spanish or American cuisine and utilizing ingredients from the Philippines. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know how I feel about trying it, but like I said, I'll try anything. The Philippines are a very interesting country. I think having all of that, Western influence mixed with the Southeast Asian influence really provides a very interesting food culture. I really thought that it was amazing that hospitality was so important to Filipino culture, and I just really love the use of acidity in a lot of the cuisine. I love acid, as you know if you've watched my channel. I love cooking with acidic foods, and I liked that, it wasn't all citrus, right? It was using different vinegars and making vinegars out of the ingredients that are present in the islands. there's the pork adobo. It looks so good. Oh my god. I got the sauce nice and thick and made it into a glaze by reducing it down at the end, but I'm super happy with this. It looks so good. I can't wait to eat it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I've always wanted to learn about the food culture of the Philippines. It's something that's been on my bucket list, but we have to end the video by spinning the globe and deciding which culture I'm going to choose for next week's video. That's the ocean. Hold please. And we got Russia. Russia is a massive country, so I might have to split this up and maybe just choose a region, because I will say the video on India was very challenging and I don't feel like I included as much as I researched, but this week's video is gonna be Russia. You can see. It's pretty big country, so I don't know very much about Russian cuisine, so very interested to learn about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure that you tune in for next week's episode on Russia. Let me know if there's anything you want me to elaborate on today's video. Like I said, and I said this in the last video, I'm definitely going to be talking very broadly when I speak about the food culture, because I really want to focus in on the ingredients, and I want to focus in on, how the culture has changed and the modern cuisine that's available in the culture as well. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.